Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar with iland, which is all around the importance of disaster recovery. My name's Danielle Chapman. I work in the marketing team at Bytes, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Mark Beder, Global Director Solutions Architecture from iland. So I'm just going to go over the agenda quickly. So today we're going to be covering why backup alone isn't enough, how cloud now changes the cost model to make disaster recovery affordable for all organisations, and how full visibility, management, reporting and documentation make the transition to cloud resources seamless. So during the last 9 months, Bytes have worked with a massive number of customers to help them solve some of today's technology challenges. One area that we've seen a real focus in is disaster recovery and the strategy surrounding this. It's never been more important to ensure that an organisation is fully resilient against potential downtime. And here at Bytes, we feel that iland are one of the best in show platforms to ensure an organisation has an easy to use yet configurable solution when implementing a new disaster recovery strategy. So with that, I'm just going to pass over to Mark.
Thanks, Anya. So here's probably the most obvious statement of the day and today's session, but it needs to be said all the same. Organizations depend on their applications to function. There was a statement from Gartner a couple of years back, which went along the lines of, nowadays, every company is a technology company. And what was really meant behind that is that we all leverage infrastructure technology in some way or another to perform our core business functions. And those core business functions are numerous, but it's safe to say without them, our organizations can't function the way they do today. And it doesn't matter what vertical you're in, what sector, the fact is data and technology play a key part in being able our organizations to function. So DR really kind of comes to the heart in terms of how do we protect those key systems and the data within them. But one of the things we want to do is just take a quick step back and actually look at what are some of the risks we face nowadays. What's most likely, and therefore what are we trying to protect against? So even though it's marked here in low probability, we've all been living through the pandemic in 2020, and if anyone had asked a year ago, would we be, would 2020 have panned out this way? The answer would have been a unanimous no. But here we are, we've lived through it, we are living through it, but it is an example of what is ultimately a low probability event. It can still happen. But what's actually more of a high probability event, and I'm just going to call out the 3 highlighted in blue, is ransomware. And we've got a few statistics to share about the prevalence of ransomware and how it is continuing to be on the rise. Communications failure is simply that. You could have a network provider outage. You could lose access into your primary data center. It doesn't necessarily mean the building is destroyed or inaccessible, but you can't connect to it. And because it's remote, it ultimately means your systems are offline. And then malicious insider, there's numerous statistics out there from various security vendors that have done research on this, which actually state the malicious insider is probably one of the biggest risks to most organizations. This could be a disgruntled employee or someone who has been compromised in another way, potentially by some outside influence, to then cause harm to the organization. So there's just a few examples of some of the things which can affect an organization, which ultimately would cause you to potentially lean on disaster recovery. But I said I'd share a few statistics around the ransomware side of things. And here are some, and these are not meant to scare anybody. They're just showing the prevalence of ransomware. And with the appropriate measures in place, you can protect yourself against this sort of activity. On the first bullet point, when you think 14 seconds to 11 seconds, that doesn't sound that significant, but that's a 20% difference. And then the last one, around how long it takes to restore services, the important message behind that statistic is not so much that of the time lapse, but it's the value of that time lapse. Again, there's numerous data sources out there, but some estimates will say for every hour of downtime equates to thousands in lost revenue. And sometimes those thousands, and depending on the organization you are and depending what your revenue numbers are, that could be the hundreds of thousands. Some of it's direct, i.e. you couldn't transact, you couldn't do business, and some of it's intangible, you know, reputational damage, etc., brand damage, that sort of thing. But what's the most reassuring element is actually that if you have a solid backup and DR plan in place, you're able to survive these things. You're able to bring your business back online and bring it back online quickly. And that's what we're going to get onto later on in this presentation. It's that quickly piece, which is really important. So, you know, when we think about what infrastructure and environments have been, for the most part, up until, you know, 2012, 2013, which is really when cloud started to pick up in terms of its adoption, infrastructure was on premises. It might have been virtualized, it might not have been, but the end point is, you know, the main thing we're trying to say here is that it was in one location, which is very easy to conceptualize and equally to work out a plan on how to protect. But as time has progressed, we find our data and our mission critical infrastructure is moving. It's no longer just on premises. And by on premises, for the record, I could also be referring to a data center which has been, you know, selected, you know exactly where it is, that sort of thing. Now we're extending into cloud. Additionally, we're extending into SaaS. So you have this data sprawl, and these applications are no longer entirely within your control. So how can you protect this? Because ultimately you need to capture that critical data regardless of where it resides. How do you protect those systems, and how do you ensure your business continuity? As a general strategy, you know, there's three key principles, which is how do we prevent attack? How do we protect against one that we couldn't prevent? Because the reality is no security system is foolproof. And then for the ones that we couldn't protect against, how do we recover from? And it's that holistic view of protection which is needed to ensure that quick ability to recover in the event of a disaster. It would be naive to say that any one security solution is going to both prevent and protect you completely. And even with a multitude of solutions, you still have the threat of, you know, malicious insider, and some of the low probability events, which software and technology is not necessarily going to protect you against. So it's that ability to recover quickly, which is critical, and, you know, that's the core of what we're talking about today when it comes to disaster recovery. So, you know, it's obvious, but it's worth pointing out that backups alone are not going to do the job. And yes, backups will protect your data and they will give you the ability to recover said data, but it's the time that's the issue. Even with offsite backup to the cloud, which, you know, iland provides, and we'll do a quick overview later on in terms of the full scope of services, even that in its own right, it is not going to allow you to restore quickly. And it's that speed and efficiency which helps protect revenue, brand, and reputation. So that's just kind of setting the scene. That's a little bit about what we're trying to cover today. And with that, I actually want to go into a demo of our console, and we can talk through some of those features and capabilities that we've built into our environment, which enable you to recover quickly and deliver that DR as a service in a cloud flexible consumption model. So let's move on over to the console. Here we are, we have it in the background. Now, when you log into the iland environment, you will ultimately land on the dashboard for your environment. Now, there's lots to walk through today, and we don't have as much time as we would like to cover a full demonstration, which we typically use 45 minutes to an hour in its own right, just for the technical demo. But there's a few key elements that we want to highlight today, just to give you a feel for some of the power and the capability. So first and foremost, this is a single pane of glass to manage your entire environment when it comes to disaster recovery. However, it's worth pointing out that iland does have other services, and should you wish to leverage them, it would be through the same single pane of glass. So Secure Cloud is our platform where we deliver disaster recovery from and our infrastructure as a service from. So it's the same enterprise grade infrastructure, whether you're running DR workloads or production workloads. Equally, you can manage your offsite cloud backups, your 365 backup, and we also have object storage, which can be leveraged for a lot of other backup technologies, which don't directly integrate with our cloud backup, but can be used as offsite storage and modern application services, etc., etc. But before we go into the actual, inner workings of the DR piece, it's worth calling out that security is paramount to what iland does. And equally, there's a whole raft of compliance certifications and attestations which we adhere to demonstrate our commitment to security. So we'll start our demo by really going into that first and foremost. And one of the things that's worth calling out, if I click back up here, is we have this user management piece over here. And within user management, we can issue out full role-based access control to any user that we configure within the environment. So we can add our user here, and we can start to create custom roles. There are some built-in roles, as you can see over here, things like a backup admin or a full admin. But what iland has done, taking security to heart in terms of what we do, we can, for example, maybe you have a specific application that's going to run in the cloud, or you want to issue out access to your network administrator, but you don't want them to have access to other things. We can come into the environment here, choose specific networks, and then start to configure the access. We can do read-only and write, and if we go into write, we can even change it to that level. So we go create policy, and then we can choose the network, a specific network we want to give access to, and that way provide granular permissions for management and administration of the iland environment. And this applies across all the services that are consumable through the console. So if we come back to the main dashboard, whoops, sorry, wrong one. Now that we know that our users that are working in the environment have got the specific access to do what they need and only what they need, let's talk about how we could actually facilitate DR and how that will work. So I'm going to jump to our Dallas region, and we'll move across to continuity. We'll come back to a little bit more on security in a moment. So in this scenario, we have a number of virtual machines that are being protected. What's happening is these virtual machines are being replicated from the on-premises environment into iland. That replication is taking place in near real time, and that's visible from this column over here, your actual RPOs. And as you can see, the virtual machines are within seconds of their production state. Typically, it will range from 3 to 6 or 7 seconds, but invariably under 10 is a standard. And then what we can do is, let's say we've had a situation where a workload has failed. You'll notice it talks about recovery groups. So we can group VMs into line of business applications. So I'm going to choose this one here because it's got 3 VMs as part of it. We can just click on our failover wizard, and we can choose a failover type. Now, test and live, as the names would suggest, a test failover is simply that. We're testing the capability. And this is a really important element, and that's what we're going to run today, is the ability to test your DR without any impact to production. Because iland is independent and completely isolated from your production workloads, you can test anytime you like. It could be during working hours, it could be at the spur of a moment. There's nothing to stop a test taking place because it will have no impact on production. So much so that while a test is happening, your replication is still happening in the background. So it doesn't even impact on your continuous protection of your production environment. So we're going to do a recovery group. You'll notice that there was also a run book. That's a feature, and you can see in the background here, which iland has built into our console, where you can actually orchestrate not just a recovery of VMs within a line of business application, but your entire environment. So here we can see we have a number of recovery groups. You could have a run book which could orchestrate those in themselves. And that's an added feature that's unique to iland. But we're going to do a group today for this demo. So we'll click next. And we're going to choose the one, like I said, that has 3 VMs in it, which is this particular recovery group. And you'll notice there's this checkpoint column, and it refers to latest. Now, When you do a recovery, it will default to the latest point in time that it has protected, but you can choose another point in time. And this is really where you can start to protect yourself from events like ransomware. iland's recommendation for most of our customers is to take what we call a 7-day journal. Now, the 7-day journal allows you to go back to any point in time, and you'll see the granularity in a second when I click on this, within 7 days. And this is great in a sense of, let's say an event, a ransomware attack took place on a Friday afternoon, and it's a bank holiday weekend. In reality, the likelihood of that being detected, whilst it could happen over the weekend that it's identified, it may only get detected on the Tuesday, because it could be a particular file server or something to that effect. You have the ability to go back in time up to 7 days and choose a point in time that you want to restore your environment to. That restoration can also be done in isolation. So without internet access, you can run whatever diagnostic tools you need over the environment once it's restored, identify where that ransomware is, remove it, and ultimately you've then recovered your whole environment, and it's clean and it's protected to the point where you can then send it back to production. You can replicate back the other way. So we click on Change Checkpoint, and what we'll see when this window loads is all the different points in time that we can go back to. And you'll notice the frequency of those checkpoints. And the closer you get to the day itself that you're on, so if we go to today, you'll notice that these are seconds apart. So it's the further you go back in that window, it becomes minutes apart, but within the immediate 24 hours, it's seconds. So we can choose any point in time we want and restore the environment to that checkpoint. So I'll just pick this one from this morning. We'll say submit, click next, and submit. And what that's going to do, you would have seen some tasks kick off here in our task center. That's going to initiate our failover. That's going to start bringing those virtual machines up in the environment. And ultimately, you can already start to see them appear over here. It groups the recovery groups into what's called a VApp. And you can see that there's dash testing and recovery over here. And what we'll start to see is some new virtual machines appear as that VApp builds and recovers, where we've got some new virtual machines running here with a dash testing recovery. So while we're waiting for that to run, notice you can see that running here under an active failover task. In the recent tasks that we've run are visible over here. And while that's running, I'm going to show you the report that comes off the back of your DR test, which is this one which I ran just the other day, and the granularity you get. So if we look at this failover report, and we just scroll through and we see what I mean by granularity, you get a date and time, how long it took to run, what the status was, because again, if you're testing and you're trying to facilitate, demonstrate your DR capabilities to an auditor, that might be one of the reasons, and you want to take some notes. Equally, if it failed for whatever reason, you might want to take notes, reference an ITSM ticket system, something that gives you some audit trail. But if you look down here, you actually get a breakdown on every task that was executed and the timing for those tasks. Now, these are the sorts of audit reports that can be handed directly to an auditor in the event of illustrating your DR capabilities. So I just wanted to quickly show that. So again, we can see our failover test running in the background. That's just kicking off. We can start to see some more VMs appear here with dash testing recovery. And while we're waiting for that to finalize, I just quickly want to jump through to our security tab, where, as I mentioned, we're going to come back to just to show a little bit more. So with security being at the heart of everything iland does, one of the things that we've done is we've actually integrated in security technology into the platform as a standard. And what that means is when you do fail over, you immediately have enterprise-grade security technology available to you so that your DR environment is as secure, if not more secure, than your production environment. So we have vulnerability scanning built into the platform, and we have antivirus, anti-malware, along with other VM-based firewall, intrusion protection, web protection, and so on, built into the platform. And that means when you're at most at risk or most really in an emergency in a DR situation, the last thing you want to be worrying about is, am I more exposed in the DR environment? Is it as secure as my production environment? And the answer here is yes. One of the things that we could also have built into our platform is a self-service ability to pull up our compliance reporting. So if ever you needed to present a report to a third party in terms of how secure you are in a DR space, these are iland's compliance reports available to pull down on demand and pass on to an auditor or a third party potential customer and so on. So if we go back to continuity, what we'll see is we'll get the status over there, still running through. But if VMs that have now started to come up, and let's jump to the app server. One really important element behind the iland environment, you'll notice it's powered off at the moment, but it will power on fairly soon, is this cloud platform is powered by VMware. So if you think of, I have a VM on premises today running VMware and I now need to spin it up in DR, you're removing the risk of hypervisor conversion. You're removing that potential issue that may come about with different drivers, different IO controllers. Your VM as it is on premises is exactly the same in terms of the underlying platform. And the controls that are made available to you are exactly the same. I can readjust the CPU, I can change the memory, I can reconfigure the disks, and equally I could change the networking. Here you can see you got the hardware version, and when this VM is running, you'll equally see performance data in real time. So you can look at storage metrics, CPU, RAM, etc. with regards to your VM and see how it is running and operating. So if we just refresh, we should actually have this VM on now. Unfortunately, not just yet, so we'll come back to that in a moment. So let's just go back up here. We will actually get a notification when that continuity is finished, or that recovery task is finished rather, and so we'll go into there as well. So while we're waiting for that, just to finish up, as there's something I want to show you in terms of capabilities with your machines that are powered on, another area that's really important is the networking. Now, no DR solution is effective if your end users can't actually connect to it. Yes, your server infrastructure may be available, but if you can't continue to function and do what you need from a business perspective, there's limited value. So to that end, the iland environment and the iland solution is flexible from a connectivity standpoint. We leverage network virtualization under the covers, which allow you to, and I know this might sound simple, but it's a really important element, retain your IP configuration. So any networking information that exists on premises can be replicated to the DR environment, and therefore you're not having to undergo things like IP configuration changes in the event of a DR. So what we have is we have this NSX edge, which is the network perimeter, which is included as part of the solution, and we can accommodate third-party connectivity. It might be an MPLS or a point-to-point connection. You can very easily do VPN connectivity into iland, and you can manage all that environment from this console without any hassle. So let's just quickly jump back to our VM. And we'll notice here we're starting to see some usage metrics in terms of as the VM starts to power on. We can see it now has its IP, we can see its storage, and we can see the state is powered on. And one of the things that's really important if you think about a DR event is the ability to open the VM console. Now, the VM console, as an example, is not available in a lot of cloud providers. You have to use things like SSH or RDP to connect into your VMs. By having the VM console, you can actually get to your VMs the same way you would on premises, that is. And why this is important is if there's any issue when the VM powers on, maybe there's been a an OS issue and there's a blue screen or something to that effect, or a network driver hasn't loaded, so you don't have the connectivity into it, you can address it and work with that VM directly through the console, which therefore allows you to give you more control in a DR situation. So if we look here, here's our server, we can send a control delete, and we can work with that machine exactly the same way we would on premises. So we'll just close that down. So that's a really quick step through of the iland environment, of the console. Like I say, typically a technical demo would really run into 45 minutes to an hour, but we don't have that time today. Hopefully this has brought up a couple of questions and you'd like to see more. At the end of this presentation, there's details on how to reach out and contact us and see more of the console, and indeed find out more details and speak to one of the team. So let's just jump back to the presentation. So we've seen a little bit of DR and how it works within the console at iland, but really, what are the benefits of DR as a service? Quite simply, it's an OpEx model. So you pay for what you consume. For the most part, what you'd be consuming day to day is storage in the iland environment, in the iland cloud. You're not running any VMs, as you saw when you invoke a failover, whether it be test or live. That is when your VMs boot, and that's when you start consuming compute resources. We'll show in a subsequent slide the geographic location that iland regions exist in. But what this is and because of that, you can choose where you send your DR to. Within the UK, we have 2 regions and we have another region in the Netherlands. So from a European perspective, there are choices as to where you want to send your data. As we saw, we just did a failover test now. You could do that whenever you like. It could be a weekend, it could be during the day, morning, afternoon. There's no mandate as to when that has to happen. And then we stepped through some of the reporting. We looked at one of those failover reports, and equally there were all the security reports that were available to consume. And this in turn gives you the ability to have confidence that your DR will work when you need it to. And like I mentioned, security is part of who we are. And these are just some of the frameworks and attestations that we have over at iland. Equally, we have a dedicated compliance team that work towards maintaining these, and as regulations are evolved and changed, that compliance team will work with the various departments to make sure we remain in line with the guidance from the frameworks. It's also important to note that these are not accreditations that are coming from our infrastructure providers, in other words, the data center providers that we leverage. These are iland specific certifications and attestations. In other words, our organization. We're not leaning on our partners to present these. So really, what's at the heart of DR, and what are you trying to do with DR in general? Really, you're trying to reduce risk. That's a fundamental element. The risk of both those high and low probability events that we covered earlier on. Equally, there's the desire to save money. If you don't have to run a second site and procure all the infrastructure that goes with that second site, and indeed manage all the infrastructure that's in that second site, you in turn save money. And then finally, by freeing up that capital resource and that human resource, you can focus on revenue generating activities that deliver more business value to your organization. In other words, if your DR solution as it stands today, and you have a second site, and the infrastructure in that second site has a capital expenditure value of 100,000, and you then don't have to refresh that, that's 100,000 that comes back into the business. And if it needed an FTE, an individual to manage and maintain it, again, that individual can then focus on other activity to help drive the business forward. Now, it's worth noting that we leverage 2 technology partners to facilitate our DR service. We have a Zerto offering and a Veeam offering, but ultimately, both provide choice and flexibility and different price points and different feature points. The what we showed in the demo was our Zerto DR capabilities. If you were leveraging Veeam, it would also be consumed through the console. Slightly different interface, slightly different capabilities, but same ability to fail over your environment directly from the console, wherever you are at any time. And really what we're talking about today is the capabilities on the left, the abilities to protect and recover. To our points earlier on, when we talked about the strategy, you want to be able to prevent, protect, and recover. So we're talking about those protect and recover capabilities. But like I mentioned, our DR services run on the same platform as our infrastructure as a service platform solution. And therefore, you're actually getting production level performance in the event of the DR. So you're not having to cut corners, and you're getting the benefit of all of that on an OpEx consumption-based model. Now, for a lot of organizations, there's this thought of, well, how do I get started? How do I even know what I need for DR? At Iland, we've developed a tool called Catalyst. Now, Catalyst is a tool that can assess the environment as it stands today. It reads data from vCenter, and it will actually be able to tell us if there's any incompatibilities, any configuration that may be unsupported or needs to be adjusted prior to invoking DR, and equally the resources that would be required in a DR environment, so that you can have confidence in the costs associated to it, the compatibility, and the success of that DR exercise when you moved and to consume the iland services. Equally, you'll notice on the screen there's the ability to measure other services. So when I showed earlier about infrastructure as a service, backup as a service, the same tool can be run to find out how those other services could be leveraged with iland. Now, I mentioned we have global regions. We're a global cloud provider. We have 10 global regions today, as you can see from the map, all over the world, with North America, EMEA, and APAC represented. Our platform has a 100% availability SLA, and it's something we're very proud of. Equally, when it comes to DR as a service in particular, we've been the leader in the Gartner MQ for the last 4 years. Gartner didn't run one in 2020, but it's safe to say we're confident that had they done so, we would have been in that same position. And it's not just Gartner. If you look at other elements of the industry, Forrester used to run a DR as a service provider, what they call Forrester Wave, in which case we were in the leader position in that as well. And we hold cloud advisory positions on all our partners' boards and have been founding members of those boards since their inception. So thank you to everybody for joining today and for listening. I'd like to open up for questions that we have. But indeed, if, to Danielle's point at the start, if there are more things you'd like to find out about post this webinar, please do get in touch. There are free trials available on iland.com/free. Very easy website to remember. But please welcome any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's lovely. So we've had a few questions come in. If anyone does want to pop any more in the box, then please feel free, because we've got a little bit of time. So I'll kick things off with the first one. One key area I'm interested in budgeting for is for testing and failover events. Is there a way you can work with organizations to understand these ad hoc cost areas?
That's a great question. So to the point on the Catalyst tool that iland's developed, by running that Catalyst tool, one of the things you'll actually be able to do is provide the data to iland, which will enable us to give you hourly, daily, weekly, and monthly run costs. So if you were to fail over for whether it be test or live, you can have an expectation of what that cost would be for those compute charges when you fail over.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. Networking is definitely a critical aspect for us for DR. How does iland generally work with customers to get this part of a solution right?
Absolutely. If you can't connect to the service and consume it, it has it's very little value. So we put a lot of focus on the networking side of things, and that's one of the reasons we offer the flexibility that we do to connect in, where customers can bring in their own carriers, their own providers, to allow continuity of the way their networks are set up. We can co-locate devices as well. So we have customers that potentially want to leverage different networking technology, different firewall technology. We can co-locate that alongside the solution. So really, that's part of what we do up front in that pre-sales solution design phase. We'll understand how end users connect into the environment, what's the geographic dispersal of offices if there's multiple ones, how do all those pieces interact with one another, and we then ensure that from a DR perspective that can be continued and connectivity can be maintained so that the services can be, so for the most part our main goal is to try and make it as seamless for end users as possible.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. So how do you support Hyper-V based infrastructures?
So when it comes to Hyper-V, predominantly we can offer our backup services. And if you are moving into infrastructure as a service, we can facilitate that migration. But as it stands today, we don't actually provide DR for Hyper-V environments. So there still are other service offerings, but not the DR as a service.
Thank you, Mark. And what is the process for a DR test?
So the DR tests, for the most part, are self-service. As we saw in the console, you can log in at any point in time and invoke a test. Our support team is available 24/7 should you run into any issues, and they can be contacted through the chat function in the console, phone or email. And they'll be there to assist if there's any particular issues or concerns, but it really is self-service. There is a managed DR option, which iland has, called Autopilot, where we can do a lot more of that for you and facilitate multiple tests within a year. But it's more down to the end organization, the end customer, as to how they want to consume the DR as a service. But there isn't a set process per se. It's self-service whenever you like.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. So I think we'll leave it there today. If anybody does have any questions, as I said, please do fill out the survey at the end, because we love to hear your feedback. We want to make sure that these sessions are valuable to you. So if anyone has any questions that you think of afterwards, please just email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk and we'll get that answered for you. And as Mark has said, you have the chance of getting a free trial and a free assessment as well. So just fill out that survey if you would like that. But thank you so much everyone for joining today. And thank you, Mark, for speaking.
No problem. Thank you for having us.
I hope you all have a good day.
Take care, everyone.